My original review for this Quattroporte actually came out way back in 2019. It was very early in my Beards in Cars career, and it was only the second car I'd owned anyway, so I will freely admit there was some rose-tinted glasses going on there. But now with time, and of course having owned 2 more Quattroportes since then, well, that immediately tells you something about how much I love them, but also, why the thumbnail? Why am I changing my stance on one of my favourite cars from my favourite brand? Well, because Maseratis have a lot of horror stories around them. People seem terrified of owning them, and in some cases I'd say that's kind of justified. And to me, the biggest key of owning a Maserati and enjoying it is to know which one to choose. And although some owners of these cars, sometimes called the DuoSelect, sometimes called the F1, there are a number of names, sometimes even a Cambiocorsa, these are the cars which, simply put, as a Maserati superfan, I would say you should not buy. Or at least, for most of you watching this, you shouldn't buy. See, it comes down to what you want from the car, and this is where I can understand where some people are coming from who do defend them. Now, what are the pros and cons? Simply put, the 2 that I've owned since this car were both facelift models, from like 2008 to 2013 or so, with the ZF gearbox. Same gearbox as a Jag XK, a Rolls-Royce Phantom, a number of others too, a conventional automatic with paddles. See, these cars don't have an automatic at all. It's an automated manual, so it has a clutch, it just doesn't have a clutch pedal, and for those who don't know, unless you use those paddles exclusively, it will eat its own clutch, and it will take as little as 20,000 miles to do it. So on the one hand, you could say, well, that's fine, I'll just use the paddles all the time, that sounds like a lot of fun. I mean, I'm driving basically a Ferrari engine car with 4 doors, why wouldn't I want to use the paddles? Well, that's my inherent problem with these. See, it's a flawed car by design. On the surface, the idea of a 4-door supercar sounds great, but then when you actually drive one, especially like an executive GT spec, which is more about the comfort, well, now it just doesn't make any sense. This car doesn't need dry sump lubrication. It doesn't need a clutched, auto, hybrid, weird Frankenstein gearbox that is more suited to a sports car. It doesn't need these things. It certainly doesn't need to roll backwards in traffic because it has an F1 brake system. Who was ever asking for that from a limo, which is this car's main purpose? See, in a sports car, I have no issue with that. If this were a Grand Sport, a 4200, 3200, that's fine. But it isn't. It's a luxury executive car, and having those things just doesn't make sense. So yes, on the one hand, they are incredibly engaging to drive. The fact that these actually have more of a rear weight bias than the newer ZF cars do. The newer cars have 51% over the back, these have 53% over the back, so a pretty drastic difference, partially because of the dry sump lubrication. For those who don't know what dry sump is, it basically means that the oil sump, instead of just draining to the bottom of the engine into the pan, is actually stored separately and pumped away from the bottom of the engine, which allows the engine to be mounted lower in the car, reducing the centre of gravity, like a race car. Now, again, for a sports car, that's a great idea. This is a limo. Why does it have that? It doesn't need that. It's pointless. And although adding more weight over the back end isn't inherently bad, especially with the wedge-shaped body that it has, which gives it incredible cornering, to this day the Quattroporte as a range, this and the ZFs, are probably my favourites of them all. There's just something inherently flawed to me about these cars. I only owned mine for 2 months. After those 2 months, I literally went to leave my driveway one day, tried to put it into reverse, it for some reason wouldn't. I didn't think anything of it, so I thought, I'll just put it in neutral and let it roll back instead. That was a big mistake, because now that I rolled back across 2 lanes, it wouldn't go into drive or reverse, and I was stuck blocking the entire road. Thankfully, other people came out of their cars and helped me push it back up, but the fact remained, the car just had whatever issue. They're known for their F1 pump going, they're known for a variety of transmission-related issues, and those issues, because of being a predominantly handcrafted baby Ferrari in effect, well, of course they're not going to be simple. Of course it's more specialised. Of course it's going to have 4-figure prices to fix. And when, for full exposure, I only paid $7,500 to begin with, which certainly wasn't an uncommon price for one of these in 2019, well, it just kind of adds up against the car. Now, some of you will probably just end the video before I've even got to this point thinking, well, it doesn't even sound like it's worth the trouble. That's the problem though. See, these cars are worth the trouble, but only for a really specific kind of buyer. If you are like me and you love Maseratis, you always wanted one, and you actually need a car that you can rely on and use as a daily driver, which is exactly what I do with my current one, a dark green 2008. Prior to that, I had a dark blue 2009, both facelift ZFs, as I said. They're fantastic as dailies. In fact, they need to be used every day, if possible, because much like a Bentley, they need that frequent use to keep them in better condition. It will eat up the miles, no trouble. As long as you keep it maintained, keep it serviced, you'll still have small electrical issues, mostly here and there, because it's Italian at the end of the day. But these earlier ones are different. These earlier ones are not for somebody who wants to use a car as a relaxing, daily, luxury, prestige car. If you want that, honestly, as a Maserati fan, buy a Jag. Because if that's what you're looking for, get yourself an XJR, or even better, get yourself an XFR. Same kind of price, tremendous cars, and at the end of the day, there's a reason why I gave the XFR my car of the year 2020. So honestly, check out those reviews and check out those cars because they are tremendous. If you're looking for just a simple, daily luxury muscle car, Jags are way better for that. However, when it comes to this one, this is a car that I would recommend for somebody who wants the Maserati as a toy. If you want to use it every day, buy a ZF. If you want it as a sports car with 4 doors or a toy for the weekend, then absolutely try out one of these. Now, the best thing I would recommend is also, of course, to test drive both if you can, because they do feel different. They're both close enough to be recognised as, of course, the same model in different iterations, but they're subtly different. Some people prefer these older cars for their swoopier, curvier looks. Some prefer the newer one. It looks a bit more German, a bit more executive, and a little bit more subtle. Originally, I used to prefer these older ones, now I prefer the newer ones, and you can go back and forth on personal preference. Overall, though, for me, it's pretty cut and dried. The newer cars are 100% better as daily drivers. These are better as pure performance cars. See, these are also technically a bit quicker for the same level. If you compare one of these executive GTs to a newer executive GT, these are a bit sharper, a bit quicker. And it's almost, at least in terms of design, almost like comparing a Ferrari 360 to a Ferrari 430. The 360 is very soft, very round, very pretty, very much early 2000s, like these. And then you've got the F430, which is still curvy, but more sharp, more aggressive, more angular, and that's more like the ZF cars. So again, it's down to which you prefer, and certainly down to how you intend to use it. If you are fully committed to owning a limo, which you have to use paddles with all the time, which you will roll backwards in traffic on a hill in if you're not holding the brake, and which has dry sump lubrication for really no good reason, and a variety of other things like that, which are more akin to a sports car or a race car than a limo, then absolutely go for it. And you will find an advantage is that they tend to be cheaper. There's a reason for that. But if you want a car that you can use every day, that's comfortable, simpler, and honestly feels shockingly well put together for a company that has so much fear surrounding it when it comes to reliability, I can honestly say, when I owned even this one that I only had for 2 months, it was still as reliable as the Bentley I had, which also only lasted 2 months, except I paid more than double the price for the Bentley. Then if you compare the second one I had, the 2009, well, in the 5 months I had that, should have never got rid of it, I actually traded it for the Bentley, that one was more reliable in those 5 months than my Jag XKR was in the same 5-month period, and I ended up having the Jag for 7 months. The Jag was great, but it still had a larger issue, which was corroded brake lines due to its mileage and salt on the road. Then if you compare the one that I've got now, the only issue I've really had with it, at least at the time of recording this, is it needs a new solenoid for the fuel cap release door button. Kind of pointless button to have in the first place. There's nothing wrong with the cable in my opinion, but like I said, pointless little Italian electrics that they had to add for whatever reason. But the fact remains, Maseratis are fantastic cars. You have to know though which one to buy. And if you insist on having a DuoSelect, an F1, a Cambiocorsa, whatever you want to call it, and if you are somebody who owns one and fiercely defends it, I'm not knocking you for your choice. I had one. I love Maserati. I get it, trust me. And if you do prefer the way they drive, if you do prefer the performance, all the power to you. But you have to know what you're getting into. And that is what I really wanted to get across in this review. It's all about what you need from the car and knowing the risks associated with them. So to get ahead of one question that you might ask down below, as somebody who has owned multiple Maseratis, who's driven even more than the ones that I'm talking about, including GranTurismos, etc., and 4200s, which one should you get? You know, what's the best kind of Maserati to buy if you want to avoid the horror stories? Honestly, 2008 to 2013. Any GranTurismo, any Quattroporte from in that time, 4.2, 4.7, Standard, S, Executive, GTS, all of those are Maserati's best work, in my opinion. After that, they started to go more to the Chrysler stuff, like the Ghibli. Before that, they had the awful gearboxes, in my opinion. That window of 08 to 13 is pretty spot on. And there's also an interesting little middle ground, which some people fiercely defend, and I can kind of understand why, which is the visual early model, like around 2007, right when they transitioned. You can get the earlier shape, but it's also fitted with a newer ZF. That one I could see appealing to a very niche type of person. If you really love the look of the older one but want the advantage of the newer one, then you might want to look into one of those, but you don't tend to see as many. So look for those. Depends on which one you want as to, of course, what your budget is, and as with any prestige car, look for the least amount of owners, the least amount of mileage, and crucially, of course, as full of a history as you can get, and don't just rely on the history. Once you own the car, you need to be committed and willing to keep that specialist Maserati service history going. So if you're willing to do that, which, let's be honest, that's not anything special, you should do that with any car, but if you're committed to that, then trust me, as a 3-time owner at the time of doing this at least, they are incredibly rewarding. It literally is a 4-door Ferrari. They sound incredible, they perform incredibly well, they are honestly wonderful cars, and in my opinion, nothing else in the prestige category feels quite as much like a supercar, but at the same time is not bank-breaking to live with like a Bentley would be, or an Aston. At the same time, as great as a Jag is, Jags aren't quite as special as a Maserati, not quite as exotic, and in my opinion don't handle quite as well. So overall, fantastic car, certainly a very unique one, and even its main rivals. You know, I absolutely adore the Porsche Panamera, and the Aston Martin Rapide is a dream car of mine, but they're way more expensive than you can pay for one of these, or a ZF even. So that's it for my thoughts on the early Quattroportes. Tell me yours down below, I'm sure owners will, both good and bad, and of course, check out the channel for more Maserati reviews. But for now, as always, thanks for watching.